The night was supposed to be simple, full of fake snow, office chatter, and too much punch, but nothing about it ended simply, and I still feel the sting every time I replay it in my mind. I stood near the table of mince pies, pretending to laugh at someone's story, when I turned my head and froze. My husband, Mark, was leaning in close to Sophie, my coworker, his hand brushing her arm, his face flushed with drink, and before I could blink, his lips pressed against hers in a sloppy kiss that felt louder than the music itself. My stomach dropped so hard, I thought I might faint, but instead I stayed rooted, eyes locked, as laughter broke out nearby, people whispering, and phones slipping out of pockets. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I was stuck in this cruel moment that felt like a bad dream. My boss, Daniel, was only a few feet away, his brows raised, probably calculating how messy this would get at work. James, the office gossip, smirked as if Christmas had just come early, and I knew he'd tell the whole town before sunrise. My hands trembled as I set my glass down, afraid it would shatter, just like my marriage had in that second. The worst part? Mark didn't even notice me standing there. He was too drunk, too caught up, and Sophie looked like she regretted it instantly, pulling back, but the damage was done. I forced myself to walk away, out into the cold December air, the lights of London sparkling like nothing was wrong while my world collapsed. That image, his lips on hers, was burned into my memory, and I knew nothing about my life would ever look the same again. The next morning, I woke to a headache, even though I hadn't touched a drop, because sometimes heartbreak feels like a hangover too. I stared at the ceiling, the faint winter light creeping through the curtains, and wondered if maybe I had imagined it all. But then my phone buzzed, and reality smacked me again. A text from Hannah, my best friend. "Are you okay? I heard about last night." My chest tightened, because if she knew, then everyone knew. My phone kept buzzing, messages from coworkers, some pretending to check in, others clearly fishing for details. James had already spread the story, twisting it into a circus, probably making jokes at my expense. Mark was still snoring next to me, smelling like whiskey and regret, and I wanted to shake him awake and demand answers. But instead, I just stared at him, wondering how many lies sat hidden in his smile. My heart kept asking, was it just a kiss? Was there more? Sophie hadn't texted, but I imagined her sitting at her flat, panicking, trying to figure out if she should call me or pretend it never happened. The whole thing felt like a bad soap opera, except it was my real life, and I couldn't switch channels. I got out of bed, my legs heavy, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my tea, while my phone buzzed nonstop. The holiday cheer outside, the bells ringing, the shop windows glowing, felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't eat, couldn't think, only replay the scene in my head and wonder how much worse it would get once neighbors, coworkers, spouses, and half the town added their own spin to the story. My marriage wasn't just broken, it was now a public spectacle. By the time Mark finally woke up, rubbing his head and yawning like nothing was wrong, my anger had built into a storm I couldn't hold back. He shuffled into the kitchen, hair messy, voice groggy, asking if we had any toast, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Toast? After last night? I slammed my mug down harder than I meant to and asked, "Do you remember what you did?" His face went blank, and for a second I thought maybe he really didn't. But then his eyes darted away, guilt flashing like a neon sign. "Emma, I was drunk. It didn't mean anything," he muttered. Like that erased the sting. I wanted to throw the whole kettle at him. "The whole town knows, Mark. Do you understand that? Everyone saw you kiss Sophie." My voice cracked, but I kept going, the words spilling out like broken glass. He tried to grab my hand, Tried to say it was just a mistake, but my skin crawled at his touch. A mistake? I spat. You humiliated me. At my office. With my coworker. He kept insisting it was nothing, that Sophie had leaned in too, that it wasn't planned, but none of that mattered. The truth was simple. He crossed a line, and he did it in front of an audience. The betrayal wasn't just between us. It was public, and that made it burn worse. He swore he loved me, that he'd fix it, but I could already hear James laughing about it in the office break room, already see Sophie avoiding my eyes. My marriage had cracks I never noticed before, but now they were wide open, and I wasn't sure if they could ever be sealed again. Walking into the office on Monday felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone already knew my lines before I opened my mouth. My heels clicked against the floor, the sound too loud, too sharp, and the chatter around me dipped the second I entered. Eyes darted toward me, then quickly away, like I was radioactive. I could almost hear their thoughts. That's her, the wife, the one whose husband kissed Sophie at the party. Sophie wasn't at her desk yet, which was both a relief and a dread, because I knew we'd have to face each other eventually. James smirked at me from across the room, whispering something to another coworker, and I wanted to march over and slap that grin off his face, but I forced myself to keep walking. My boss, Daniel, called me into his office within minutes, his expression serious, not cruel, but not sympathetic either. Emma, I need you to know we're treating this as a personal matter, not a work issue, he said, but his eyes told me he knew how much this was affecting me. I nodded, pretending to be composed, though inside I was unraveling. Back at my desk, I opened my emails, trying to act normal, but every sound, every glance felt like a dagger. The office that used to feel familiar now felt hostile, like everyone was waiting for me to crack. My phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. Want to grab lunch? You need to get out of there. I typed back, yes, desperate for an escape. Meeting Hannah at the cafe felt like stepping into a safe bubble, away from the noise, though I still felt the whispers chasing me through the streets. She hugged me tight, the kind of hug that says, I know you're breaking, but I'll hold you together, and we sat by the window while the city moved outside. Red buses passing, Christmas shoppers carrying bags. Tell me everything, she said, her eyes fierce. I spilled it all, the kiss, the laughter, the way Mark tried to brush it off like spilled milk. Hannah shook her head, disbelief flashing across her face. He kissed your coworker, Emma, in front of everyone. That's not just a slip. That's humiliation. Her words echoed what I already felt, but hadn't said out loud. I pushed my sandwich around my plate, appetite gone, while Hannah leaned closer. What do you want to do? Stay? Leave? Make him sweat? The question stuck in my throat, because I didn't know the answer yet. Part of me wanted to pack his bags, throw him out, scream that I deserved better. Another part wanted to rewind time, to pretend it never happened, because starting over sounded terrifying. Hannah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Whatever you choose, I've got you. You don't have to go through this alone. For the first time since the party, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Not for my marriage, maybe, but for myself. That evening, my phone rang, and seeing Sophie's name on the screen made my stomach twist so hard I almost dropped it. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity and anger made me swipe answer. Her voice was shaky, rushed, and almost panicked. Emma, I need to say I'm sorry. It wasn't what it looked like. I let out a bitter laugh because it looked exactly like what it was. My husband's lips on hers. She tried to explain, saying Mark was drunk, that she pulled away, that it was a mistake, but none of it made me feel better. Do you know what it's like to watch your whole world collapse in front of your coworkers? I asked, my voice sharp. There was silence on her end, then a quiet sniffle. I didn't want this, Emma. I respect you. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know if I believed her. Maybe she was just scared of losing her job, scared of the whispers, too. I told her flatly that we'd talk at work, that I couldn't do this over the phone, and I hung up before she could say more. My chest felt heavy, but not with relief, more like I had opened a door to another storm. Now I had to decide if I wanted to confront her face to face, or if avoiding her forever would be less painful. Either way, Sophie wasn't just my coworker anymore. She was the other woman in the story everyone was telling. By Tuesday, the story had spread beyond the office walls, leaking into the small shops, the local pub, and even the bakery down the street where I usually bought my morning scones. As I walked in, the woman behind the counter gave me that pitying smile people use when they know your secrets, and my stomach turned. The story had grown bigger than the kiss. It had turned into a town-wide soap opera. James was the fire starter, and everyone else was happy to feed the flames, adding details that weren't true, like claims they had seen Mark flirting with Sophie for weeks, or that Sophie bragged about it after the party. I didn't know what was real anymore, only that the whole place buzzed with my humiliation. At the office, whispers followed me to the printer, to the break room, even to the bathroom where I overheard two women say, "Poor Emma, imagine finding out like that." I wanted to scream that I wasn't poor, that I wasn't weak, but I couldn't, because I was breaking inside. Mark texted me constantly, begging to talk, saying he loved me, but every message felt empty. Sophie avoided me in the hall, her face pale, her steps quick, and I wasn't sure if I hated her or pitied her. The hardest part was pretending I didn't care, when in truth I cared so much it felt like I was drowning in it. That night, just as I tried to settle into bed with my phone on silent, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Green, standing there with her little dog on a leash. She was kind, elderly, and usually only knocked to drop off leftover pies. But tonight, her eyes were wide with concern. "Emma, love, I just wanted to check on you," she said softly, and I realized she, too, had heard the story. She tried to smile, but her words carried the weight of gossip dressed as sympathy. "These things happen, dear. Men get silly after a drink." I bit back my anger, because I knew she meant well, but the casual way she excused Mark's betrayal made me want to scream. "It wasn't silly," I said firmly, and she blinked, surprised by my sharpness. I thanked her quickly, closed the door, and leaned against it, shaking. Everyone had an opinion, everyone had advice, but no one else had to wake up next to the man who broke my trust. I climbed back into bed, pulled the covers over my head, and let the tears come, wishing the world would stop looking at me like I was just the victim in their favorite holiday scandal. By Wednesday evening, I couldn't take the constant buzzing of my phone or the hollow apologies Mark kept sending, so I told him to come over and talk face to face. He arrived looking tired, his suit wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept either. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us thicker than the winter fog outside. He started with the same line. "Emma, it didn't mean anything." I slammed my fist on the table, and the sound echoing through the flat. "It meant enough for the whole town to talk about it," I snapped. His face twisted with guilt, but then he leaned forward, desperate. "I love you. Please don't throw us away over one mistake." The word us stung, because it wasn't just about us anymore. It was about trust, respect, dignity, all of which felt shattered. I told him I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine, that every time I looked at him, I saw Sophie's lipstick smeared on his mouth. He begged me, reaching across the table, but I pulled back. The distance between us wasn't just physical, It was emotional, a canyon I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. Finally, I told him to leave, that I needed space, and his face fell as he stood slowly, shoulders slumped, before walking out into the night. When the door shut behind him, I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, because I knew this was just the beginning of the hardest decision of my life. The flat felt bigger without Mark in it, but not in a good way. More like every shadow whispered his absence. Every corner reminded me of the weight of what had happened. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The empty space beside me, colder than the winter wind outside. For years, his body had been there, warm and steady, even on the nights we barely spoke, and now the silence pressed against me like a heavy blanket I couldn't kick off. I kept replaying the kiss, the look on Sophie's face, the sound of people laughing around them, and I wondered if Mark was lying in some hotel bed doing the same, or if he had already moved on to numbing himself with more drinks. My phone buzzed once with his name on the screen, but I didn't answer. Instead, I rolled over, clutching the pillow like it might fill the void, but nothing did. I wanted to be strong, to tell myself I was better off without him, but the ache in my chest said otherwise. Loving someone who betrayed you was like drinking poison. You knew it would hurt, but your body still craved it. As I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the loneliness that followed. Thursday morning, Sophie cornered me in the break room, her face pale, her hands trembling as she poured coffee that she didn't even drink. "Emma, please, can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice breaking like she was carrying her own burden. I froze, torn between wanting to scream at her and wanting to hear her beg for forgiveness. "What is there to talk about?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I meant. She looked around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned in. "I didn't plan it, I swear. Mark was drunk, and I pulled away as soon as I realized what was happening. I'm so sorry." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a split second, I almost believed her. But then James walked by, smirking at us like he was watching his favorite show, and my anger came rushing back. "Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To my marriage? To my reputation?" I hissed. Sophie's lip quivered, and she whispered, "I know, and I'll never forgive myself." Then she walked away quickly, leaving me standing there with my hands shaking, unsure if I hated her or pitied her more. The whole office was watching us, waiting for a fight, and I hated being part of their entertainment. That evening, I met Hannah again at the pub, needing her honesty more than I needed a drink. The place was buzzing with laughter, Christmas lights strung across the ceiling, but all I felt was out of place, like I was the only one carrying a storm inside. Hannah ordered us pints and leaned in, her eyes serious. "So, what's next? You can't stay in this limbo forever, Emma." I sighed, staring into the foam, wishing the answer was hidden there. "I don't know. Part of me wants to kick him out for good. Part of me still loves him." Saying it out loud felt shameful, but Hannah didn't flinch. "Of course you still love him. You built a life together, but love isn't enough if he disrespects you." Her words hit hard, because deep down, I knew they were true. I told her about Sophie's apology, about Mark's desperate messages, and about the way the whole town seemed to be feasting on my misery. Hannah squeezed my hand. "You need to decide what's best for you. Not for Mark, not for Sophie, not for the gossip mill. You." I nodded slowly, realizing she was right. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of clarity. This wasn't just about what Mark did. It was about what I would do next. Mark tried calling again on Friday morning, and this time I didn't even look at the screen. I just flipped the phone over and let it buzz until it went quiet. I was done listening to the same excuses, the same promises that sounded thinner every time he said them. Instead, I threw myself into work, burying my head in reports and emails, though it was impossible to ignore the whispers that rose whenever I passed by. Sophie kept her distance. Daniel gave me sympathetic nods but stayed out of it. And James seemed to thrive on stirring the pot. At lunch, I walked out alone, headphones in, pretending not to notice the way people stared, as if I were a character in a play they'd all bought tickets to watch. That night, when I got home, the silence of the flat was crushing, but I refused to answer Mark's texts. I knew what he wanted: forgiveness without consequences. But forgiveness wasn't something I could hand out like sweets. My silence was my weapon now, and if he felt even half the emptiness I did, maybe he would finally understand what he'd broken. By the weekend, the story had reached its ugly peak, and I couldn't escape it no matter where I went. At the grocery store, I caught two women in the aisle, whispering and glancing at me. At the cafe, the barista asked too carefully if I was doing okay. Even walking through the park, I overheard a group of teens laughing about the kiss. I felt like my private life had been turned into a public joke, and the walls of the town were closing in. Hannah came over that night, arms full of takeaway, and we sat cross-legged on my living room floor while I ranted. Why is my marriage their entertainment? Why can't people just leave it alone? I cried. Hannah listened, nodding, reminding me that people always loved a scandal because it distracted them from their own dull lives. But it's not their life, Emma. It's yours. You get to decide how this story ends. Her words stuck in my mind long after she left, and for the first time, I began to realize that maybe I needed to take control instead of letting the whispers define me. Saturday evening, just as I settled in with tea and a blanket, there was a knock at the door. My stomach flipped when I saw Mark standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers like they were some kind of magic eraser. He looked worn down, his eyes begging before he even spoke. Emma, please just hear me out. Against my better judgment, I let him in, and we sat across from each other in the living room. He poured out his heart, saying he'd been stupid, that it was the drink, that Sophie meant nothing. He swore he'd do whatever it took to fix us. Counseling, quitting drinking, moving if we had to. For a moment, I saw the man I married, the one who made me laugh and held me when life was hard. But then the image of him kissing Sophie slammed into me like a punch, and the flowers on the table looked more like a bribe than a gesture. You broke something I don't know if we can fix, I said quietly. And the way his face fell almost made me pity him. Almost. He stayed another hour, trying to convince me, but when he left, I still felt that emptiness, still unsure if love was enough to cover the wound he'd made. Sunday morning, I woke up with sunlight spilling across the room, and for the first time in days, I felt something small but powerful: freedom. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the sense that I could shape my day without waiting for Mark's mood, without pretending nothing had happened. I went for a walk through the high street, bought myself a new scarf, and stopped at the bakery, even though I knew people would whisper. And yes, they did. Two women near the window nudged each other when I walked in. But instead of shrinking, I lifted my chin and ordered what I wanted. Back home, I put on music, cleaned the flat, and felt the quiet slowly shift from suffocating to comforting. I thought about Hannah's words, about writing my own ending, and I realized maybe I didn't need to decide about Mark yet. Maybe the first step was just remembering who I was outside of being his wife. It was small, but eating my pastry at the table with no one to answer to felt like victory, and I clung to that feeling. Monday at work, I couldn't avoid Sophie any longer. She approached me at my desk, eyes red like she hadn't slept, voice low so no one else could hear. "Emma, please, can we talk somewhere private?" Reluctantly, I followed her to an empty meeting room, my stomach twisting. She closed the door and burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "I never wanted this," she sobbed. "I know I ruined everything, and I'll live with that shame forever." For a moment, watching her fall apart, I felt something I didn't expect: pity. Because as much as I hated her, she was also drowning in the same gossip storm that was eating me alive. But pity didn't erase betrayal. "You didn't just hurt me, Sophie," I said quietly. "You gave this whole town a story to laugh about." She nodded through her tears, whispering, "I know, and I'll never forgive myself." I left the room with my chest tight, more conflicted than ever. She was human, flawed, maybe even sorry, but sorry didn't fix what had been broken. That night, Mark showed up again, this time without flowers, without rehearsed lines, just raw desperation etched into his face. "Emma, I can't lose you," he said, the second I opened the door, his voice shaking. He begged me to believe it was just one mistake, that our years together meant more than a drunken kiss. He promised to quit drinking, to cut Sophie out of our lives completely, even to switch jobs if that's what it took. His hand shook as he reached for mine, and I could feel his fear, his need, but I also felt the wall between us, the one his lips had built the second they touched hers. "Mark, you want me to pretend it never happened, but I can't," I said, my voice breaking. He dropped to his knees, actually crying, and for a second, I almost gave in, almost let my heart drown my anger. But then I remembered the whispers, the humiliation, the way he didn't even notice me standing there at the party, and I pulled my hands back. "I need time. Alone." His face crumpled, but he nodded, wiping his eyes before stumbling out into the cold night. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest heavy, because even when the cheater cries, it doesn't erase the betrayal. By midweek, just when I thought the gossip had finally hit its peak, a new rumor began to spread, one so wild it made my stomach lurch. I overheard it first at the cafe, two men chuckling as they said, "Apparently Emma's been having an affair too. That's why Mark did it." My face burned hot, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my cup. It spread like wildfire, whispers that I had been unfaithful, that Mark's kiss with Sophie was some twisted payback, that maybe I wasn't as innocent as I looked. I wanted to scream, to stand on the rooftops and shout the truth, but the worst part of rumors is that the louder you deny them, the guiltier you sound. Hannah was furious when I told her, swearing she'd defend me to anyone who dared repeat it, but even her words couldn't stop the ache in my chest. Being betrayed was one thing, being painted as the villain in my own heartbreak was another. The town wasn't just gossiping now. They were rewriting my story, twisting me into a character I didn't even recognize. I couldn't take being silent anymore. So the next morning, when I walked into the office and felt the whispers following me again, I snapped. James made a snide remark under his breath about double standards, and I turned on him, my voice louder than I'd ever let it be at work. "If you're so desperate for entertainment, James, maybe write a script, because my life isn't your comedy show." The office went dead silent, everyone staring as his smirk vanished. For once, the power shifted, and I saw him shrink under the weight of his own cruelty. My hands shook, my heart raced, but I felt something new: strength. I realized that maybe I couldn't control what people said, but I could control how I responded. Sophie avoided my eyes. Daniel gave me the smallest approving nod, and I walked back to my desk with my head higher than before. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had reclaimed a sliver of myself from the gossip storm. That Friday night, Hannah convinced me to go with her to the pub, insisting I couldn't hide forever. At first, the place felt suffocating, every laugh sounding like it was about me. But then I spotted Mark at the bar with a group of his friends, and my stomach twisted. Before I could leave, Sophie walked in too, alone, her eyes instantly locking with mine across the crowded room. The tension was electric, the entire pub sensing it, and suddenly it was as if everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Mark saw us both and froze, his face pale, his friends whispering behind him. Hannah grabbed my hand, ready to drag me out, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to run anymore. I walked straight past Mark, straight past the stairs, and sat down at a table with Hannah like I owned the place. Sophie sat at the other end of the room, and though neither of us spoke, the message was clear. We weren't hiding, not anymore. The whispers swirled, but this time I didn't let them crush me. The Monday after the pub, Sophie didn't show up to work, and by midday the whispers had shifted from me to her. Some said she'd quit, others said she was hiding out of shame, and one person claimed she'd been seen crying outside her flat. Part of me felt relief, like maybe the heat would finally ease off me, but another part felt a sting of guilt because I knew she was human too, and the town could be just as cruel to her as it had been to me. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "I'm leaving the company. I can't face this anymore. I'm sorry again." I stared at the words for a long time, torn between anger and sympathy. Losing her job was a consequence I never asked for, but maybe it was inevitable. I typed out a reply, "Take care of yourself," and hit send before I could overthink it. For the first time, I realized that while she had been part of the betrayal, she wasn't my enemy. The true enemy was the betrayal itself, and the way it had spread like fire through every corner of my life. That same week, Mark showed up at my flat again, but this time he didn't come with flowers or excuses. He came with a suitcase. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "I left the house. I can't stay there without you." I stared at him, shocked, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. He begged me to give him another chance, to try counseling, to let him prove he could change. He admitted he had been drinking too much for months, admitted he had been distant, admitted he had failed me in more ways than just the kiss. His honesty cracked something in me, but not in the way he wanted. It cracked open the truth that I couldn't fix him. "Mark, I don't know if love is enough anymore," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. He dropped his suitcase and reached for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us growing wider with every word. He promised me the world, but promises felt cheap now. I told him I needed space, real space, not just a few nights apart, and he nodded slowly, broken, before leaving the suitcase by the door and walking into the cold night once more. After Mark left, something inside me shifted. I was tired of being defined by his mistake, tired of being the center of whispers, tired of waiting for people to decide who I was. So I made changes. I signed up for a yoga class, started cooking proper meals instead of living on takeaway, and even reached out to an old university friend I hadn't spoken to in years. At work, I volunteered for a project that put me in charge, forcing me to stand tall and use my voice again. Every step felt shaky at first, but with each small win, I felt stronger. Hannah cheered me on, reminding me that this was who I had always been before the betrayal clouded everything. For the first time in weeks, I looked in the mirror and saw not just a wife or a victim, but a woman rebuilding herself. The pain was still there, the uncertainty still heavy, but for the first time, I felt a spark of control. December rolled in, and the town was buzzing with the Christmas market, stalls lining the cobbled streets with mulled wine, roasted chestnuts, and twinkling fairy lights. Hannah convinced me to go with her, saying I deserved to feel the holiday spirit again, and for a while, it actually worked. I laughed, sipped hot chocolate, and felt almost normal as the music played. But then, like a shadow cutting through the lights, I saw Mark across the crowd. He looked thinner, worn down, and when his eyes found mine, the world seemed to shrink around us. He pushed through the crowd until he was right in front of me, his voice cracking as he begged me to talk, to come back, to not leave him alone for Christmas. People were staring, their curiosity sharper than the cold air, and I hated that once again. My private heartbreak was on display. I told him firmly we would talk, but not here, not like this, and walked away, my heart pounding. Hannah grabbed my arm and whispered, "You handled that perfectly." But inside, I was shaking, because no matter how far I pulled away, Mark always seemed to find me. A week later, Mark showed up again, this time at my office. He waited outside in the cold until I came out, his face pale, his hands trembling as he said, "Please, Emma, just one last chance." His voice was desperate, almost frantic, and I could feel the eyes of coworkers as they walked past, pretending not to watch. I told him again that I needed space. The chasing me down in public wasn't helping. But he wouldn't let it go. He grabbed my hand, his grip too tight, his voice rising as he begged louder and louder. My heart pounded in fear, not just from his desperation, but from the realization that love had turned into something suffocating, something dangerous. Daniel stepped out of the office at that moment and quickly intervened, putting himself between us and telling Mark to back off. The tension broke when Mark finally let go and stormed off into the night, leaving me trembling on the pavement. Daniel asked if I was okay, and for the first time, I admitted the truth out loud. I don't think I can ever go back. Christmas Eve arrived, and with it, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I sat in my flat, surrounded by the quiet glow of fairy lights, staring at the suitcase Mark had left behind weeks earlier, still sitting by the door. It felt like a symbol of everything unresolved, everything broken, everything I still carried. I thought about the years we had shared, the laughter, the memories, and I thought about the pain, the betrayal, and the endless chase since that kiss. My phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "I'm at the church. I'll wait for you all night if I have to." For a moment, my heart ached with the pull of history. But then another message lit up the screen. This one from Hannah. "We're at my place. Come over. You don't have to be alone tonight." I realized then that the choice wasn't just about Mark. It was about me, about whether I wanted to stay trapped in the story of betrayal or step into something new. With shaking hands, I zipped up the suitcase, carried it outside, and left it on the doorstep for Mark to collect. Then I walked into the night, toward Hannah's warm light. Christmas morning came with silence. Outside, the streets of our small English town were dusted with frost, church bells ringing faintly in the distance. I stayed at Hannah's the night before, wrapped in laughter and warmth, instead of waiting for Mark's shadow at the door. When I walked home that morning, I saw the suitcase was gone, leaving only a faint mark on the pavement where it had stood. Inside, my phone buzzed with one last message from Mark. "I'll always love you. Goodbye. The weight of it pressed heavily on me, but instead of collapsing, I let myself breathe. The gossip hadn't vanished. When I passed by the bakery, I still caught my name whispered between bites of mince pies, but something had shifted. For the first time, the whispers didn't control me. They were just noise, and I was still standing. In the days after Christmas, I went out more, back to the shops, to the cafe, to the market square, and everywhere I went, people still looked, still whispered. But instead of shrinking under their gaze, I held my head high, smiled politely, and carried on. Slowly, something shifted. The whispers grew duller, less certain, like people were realizing the story they clung to no longer had power. I wasn't hiding, I wasn't broken, and that seemed to confuse them. Even James, at work, stopped his digs after I called him out in front of everyone, and Daniel gave me a quiet nod of respect that meant more than words. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Sophie across the street, dressed warmly, looking thinner but freer. She saw me too, and for a moment our eyes met, not with anger, but with something like mutual understanding. We didn't wave, didn't speak, but in that silence, I felt closure. The story wasn't hers anymore. It wasn't Mark's. It was mine. New Year's Eve arrived, and Hannah hosted a small gathering at her flat. Fairy lights strung across the walls, laughter bubbling in every corner. I stood by the window as fireworks began to crackle over London, the night sky lit in bursts of color, and for the first time since the holiday party, I felt something close to joy. The pain wasn't gone, it never would be completely, but it no longer defined me. Mark hadn't tried to contact me again, and that silence was its own kind of gift. When midnight struck, Hannah hugged me tight and whispered, "Here's to new beginnings." I smiled, letting the sound of cheers and fireworks wash over me, and made a quiet promise to myself. I would not be the woman broken by betrayal. I would be the woman who rose from it, who learned from it, who started again. The whispers of the town could fade or grow louder, but I had written my own ending, and that ending was freedom.